At approximately 7:45 p.m. on Sunday, March 15, 2021, three gunshots echoed through the typically quiet neighborhood of Peachtree Gardens in Savannah, Georgia. The sounds originated from the Johnson family home, where Reverend Isaiah Johnson, his wife Deborah, and their teenage daughter Zara had gathered around the dining table for their regular Sunday dinner following evening church service. According to police reports, first responders arrived within minutes of receiving multiple 911 calls from alarmed neighbors. What they discovered inside the Victorian-style home would shock the close-knit community for years to come. We entered to find three victims with fatal gunshot wounds positioned around the dining table, stated Detective Marcus Williams, the lead investigator on the case. Food was still warm on their plates. Each victim had sustained a single gunshot wound to the chest. The precision of the shots suggested a calculated attack rather than a crime of passion. Reverend Isaiah Johnson was found slumped over in his chair at the head of the table, while his wife Deborah and daughter Zara remained in their seats, their bodies still upright, suggesting they had little time to react. The family Bible that Isaiah habitually kept beside him during family meals lay open, spattered with blood on Psalm 23. The first officers on scene encountered Jerome Johnson, Isaiah's 25-year-old son, in the kitchen. According to court documents, he was calmly washing dishes when police entered through the unlocked front door. A .38 caliber revolver registered in his name was recovered from the kitchen counter, later confirmed through ballistics to be the murder weapon. He was eerily calm, continuing to dry a plate even as officers shouted commands. As news spread through Savannah's tight-knit African-American community, the immediate question on everyone's mind was simple yet haunting. Why would Jerome Johnson, a promising law student at Savannah State University and the pride of his family, commit such a horrific act against the people who loved him most? The investigation would soon uncover a web of family secrets so devastating that Jerome apparently believed murder was preferable to their exposure. What appeared to be the perfect minister's family hiding behind Sunday smiles would reveal itself to be something far more sinister. In the months before that fateful Sunday evening, in March 2021, the Johnson family had been the epitome of success in their community. To those who attended Mount Olive Baptist Church, where Reverend Isaiah Johnson had preached for nearly 2 decades, the Johnsons represented everything a Christian family should be: devout, accomplished, and seemingly unshakable in their faith. Reverend Isaiah Johnson, 52, was a towering figure both physically and spiritually in Savannah's religious community. Standing 6 feet 4 inches tall, with a commanding voice that could fill any sanctuary without amplification, he had built Mount Olive from a struggling congregation of 40 members into a thriving church of over 800 faithful. His Sunday sermons were broadcast on 3 local radio stations, and his community outreach programs had earned recognition from the mayor's office. Reverend Johnson didn't just preach the word, he lived it, recalled Deacon Samuel Washington, a longtime church member who had known Isaiah since childhood. If there was trouble in our community, he was there. If someone needed help paying bills or finding work, Isaiah would move heaven and earth to make it happen. That's what makes this whole thing so impossible to understand. Deborah Johnson, 49, had been the perfect pastor's wife for 26 years of marriage. A former elementary school teacher, she had dedicated herself fully to supporting her husband's ministry after Jerome was born. She organized the church's food pantry, led the women's Bible study group, and maintained an open-door policy for anyone in the congregation who needed counsel or prayer. Sister Deborah had a gift for making everyone feel loved, said church member Gloria Thompson, wiping tears from her eyes during a police interview. She remembered everyone's birthdays, their children's names, their struggles. When my husband lost his job 3 years ago, she showed up at our door with groceries and stayed to pray with us. She was an angel walking among us. Their daughter Zara, 17, was a senior at Savannah Arts Academy, where she maintained a 4.0 GPA while serving as student body president. A gifted pianist and vocalist, she led the church youth choir and had already been accepted to Spelman College with a full academic scholarship. Teachers described her as mature beyond her years. She had this way of talking to people that made them want to be better. And then there was Jerome, the golden child who would ultimately destroy them all. Jerome Johnson had been born when his parents were in their mid-20s, and from the moment he drew his first breath, he was destined for greatness in their eyes. Brilliant, charismatic, and blessed with his father's commanding presence and his mother's gentle heart, Jerome had never faced a challenge he couldn't overcome. He had graduated valedictorian from Savannah High School, earned a full scholarship to Morehouse College where he majored in political science, and was currently in his second year at Savannah State University's law school, where he ranked in the top 5% of his class. He wanted to use the law to help people, just like his father used the pulpit. I was already writing him letters of recommendation for federal clerkships. But beneath this carefully cultivated image of the perfect ministerial family, cracks had been forming for years. Jerome Johnson harbored secrets that would have destroyed not only his own future, but the reputation and legacy his father had spent decades building. The first sign that something was wrong came during Jerome's junior year at Morehouse. According to his former roommate, Terrence Williams, Jerome had begun displaying increasingly erratic behavior. He started staying out all night, missing classes, Terrence told investigators. When I asked him about it, he'd get defensive, say I was judging him. But it wasn't judgment. I was worried. Jerome had always been so focused, so driven. Suddenly, he was stumbling in at 3 a.m, sometimes with cuts on his face or torn clothes. Campus security records revealed that Jerome had been involved in several incidents during his final semester at Morehouse. He was found unconscious in a campus bathroom with what appeared to be drug paraphernalia nearby, though no charges were filed. 2 weeks later, he was caught attempting to climb the fence surrounding the dean's residence at midnight, claiming he needed to speak with someone about his grades. The most serious incident occurred just before graduation. Jerome was arrested for public intoxication and disorderly conduct after an altercation outside a downtown Atlanta nightclub. According to the police report, witnesses stated that Jerome had been arguing with an older white man before the confrontation turned physical. The kid was out of control, reported Officer David Brooks, who responded to the scene. He kept saying something about how they wouldn't leave him alone, how he was being followed. We thought it was just the alcohol talking, but looking back, maybe there was more to it. The charges were quietly dropped after Reverend Isaiah Johnson made several phone calls and agreed to pay for damages to the nightclub. Jerome graduated from Morehouse, but the incident left a mark on his relationship with his father that close family friends said never fully healed. Isaiah was embarrassed, confided Deacon Washington, not because of what people would say, but because he felt he had failed Jerome somehow. He kept asking himself how his son could go so far off track without him noticing. It ate at him. Jerome's acceptance to law school seemed to mark a turning point. He returned home to Savannah, moved back into his childhood bedroom, and appeared to recommit himself to his studies and his faith. He began attending church regularly again, helped with youth programs, and even delivered a few guest sermons that impressed the congregation with their depth and passion. It was like the old Jerome was back, Deborah Johnson told her sister Naomi in a phone conversation recorded by investigators after obtaining a warrant. He was studying all the time, making good grades, talking about his plans to practice civil rights law. Isaiah was so proud. We thought whatever had happened in Atlanta was just a phase, something he needed to get out of his system. But Jerome's return to form was an elaborate performance, masking a spiral into darkness that would ultimately consume his entire family.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
The investigation into Jerome Johnson's background revealed a young man living a double life so complex and dangerous that even experienced detectives struggled to understand how he had maintained the deception for so long. Financial records obtained through search warrants showed that despite having no legitimate source of income beyond a small stipend from his parents, Jerome had spent over $75,000 in the 18 months leading up to the murders. The money had been used for everything from expensive clothing and electronics to payments to what appeared to be escort services and underground gambling operations. Detective Williams traced the source of Jerome's wealth to his involvement with a sophisticated identity theft ring operating throughout the Southeast. Using his law student credentials and his father's reputation in the community, Jerome had been able to gain access to personal information from church members, many of whom trusted him enough to ask for help with legal documents, tax preparations, and other financial matters. He was the perfect inside man, explained FBI agent Sarah Rodriguez, who worked the federal investigation into the identity theft network. People trusted him implicitly because of who his father was and his own reputation as a law student. He had access to social security numbers, bank account information, credit reports, everything you need to steal someone's identity. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Jerome would offer to help elderly church members with paperwork or financial planning, using those opportunities to photograph important documents with his phone. The information would then be sold to a criminal network that would create false identities, open credit accounts, and drain bank accounts before the victims even realized what had happened. Church records showed that Jerome had helped over 200 congregation members with various financial matters over the course of 2 years. Of those, investigators eventually confirmed that at least 67 had been victims of identity theft, resulting in combined losses of over $2.3 million. The cruelest part was that these people continued to trust him even after they were victimized, said Detective Williams. They'd come to Reverend Johnson for help dealing with their financial problems, never knowing his own son was the one who had caused them. But Jerome's criminal activities extended far beyond financial fraud. Cell phone records and GPS data revealed that he had been making regular trips to Atlanta, Charleston, and Jacksonville, often staying overnight in expensive hotels and visiting locations associated with high-stakes gambling and prostitution. In Atlanta, Jerome had become a regular at an underground poker game run by a man named Vinny Castellanos, who operated out of a warehouse in an industrial district. According to surveillance footage obtained by Atlanta police, Jerome had won significant amounts of money in these games, but had also accumulated substantial debts when his luck turned. Jerome was what we call a problem gambler, explained Dr. Maria Santos, a psychologist who specializes in gambling addiction and who reviewed Jerome's case files for the prosecution. The evidence suggests he was chasing increasingly larger wins to cover his losses, which is a classic pattern. The adrenaline rush of winning becomes addictive, but the inevitable losses create a cycle of desperation. Text messages recovered from Jerome's phone revealed the extent of his gambling debts. In the weeks before the murders, he owed over $150,000 to various criminal organizations, with threats becoming increasingly violent. One message from a number traced to Vincent Castellanos read, "Your daddy's prayers won't save you if you don't pay what you owe. We know where you live, where your family goes to church. Sunday would be a bad day for a funeral." Another message sent just 3 days before the murders was even more explicit. "Last chance, preacher boy. Pay up or we start with the pretty little sister." But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Jerome's secret life was his involvement with a network of individuals who exploited vulnerable young women. Investigation revealed that Jerome had been using his law student status and his family's reputation to lure young women into what he claimed were modeling opportunities or internship programs. Phone records showed that Jerome had contacted over 30 young women between the ages of 18 and 22 over the past year, many of them students at local colleges or young women from struggling families in the community. He would offer to help them with legal issues, scholarship applications, or job opportunities, using these interactions to manipulate and exploit them. He had a whole system worked out, explained Detective Lisa Parker, who specialized in crimes against women. He'd identify vulnerable targets, young women who needed money, who had family problems, who were isolated from support systems. Then he'd present himself as this successful, trustworthy guy who wanted to help them. By the time they realized what was really happening, he had compromising photos or videos that he used to control them. Several of the women eventually came forward during the investigation, though most requested anonymity due to the shame and trauma they had experienced. Their stories painted a picture of Jerome as a master manipulator who used his intelligence, charm, and family connections to exploit people who trusted him. "He made me feel special at first," said one victim, identified in court documents only as Jane Doe No. 1. "He said he could help me get into law school, that his professors would write me recommendation letters. But once I was alone with him, everything changed. He became controlling, demanding. When I tried to leave, he threatened to show my family photos he had taken without my permission. The scope of Jerome's criminal empire was staggering. By conservative estimates, he had defrauded over $2.3 million from identity theft victims, accumulated $150,000 in gambling debts, and exploited dozens of young women. But it was the discovery of his final scheme that revealed why he had chosen murder over facing the consequences of his actions. 3 weeks before the murders, Jerome Johnson made a discovery that would seal the fate of his entire family. While searching through his father's home office for documents he could use in his identity theft schemes, Jerome stumbled upon a file that revealed a secret Reverend Isaiah Johnson had been keeping for over a decade. The file, labeled Church Building Fund Private, contained bank statements, legal documents, and correspondence that showed Reverend Johnson had been systematically embezzling money from the church's building fund for the past 12 years. The total amount stolen exceeded $800,000, money that had been donated by faithful congregation members who believed they were contributing to the construction of a new sanctuary. According to the documents, Isaiah had used the stolen money to pay for Jerome's expensive education, Zara's private school tuition and music lessons, Deborah's medical treatments for a chronic condition she had hidden from the congregation, and to maintain the family's lifestyle that appeared successful, but was actually far beyond what a minister's salary could support. The most damning evidence was a series of letters between Isaiah and the church's accounting firm, in which the Reverend had repeatedly requested extensions on financial audits and had provided false documentation to cover up the missing money. One letter, dated just 6 months before the murders, showed that Isaiah was becoming increasingly desperate as church leaders began asking more pointed questions about the building fund. The hypocrisy was what broke Jerome, explained Dr. Michael Thompson, a forensic psychologist who evaluated Jerome after his arrest. Here was a young man who had been living a double life, stealing from people, gambling, exploiting women, but he still saw his father as this moral authority figure. When he discovered that his father was just as corrupt as he was, something inside him snapped. But the discovery of his father's embezzlement presented Jerome with both a problem and an opportunity. The problem was that an upcoming church audit would almost certainly expose the missing money, leading to criminal charges for his father and public humiliation for the entire family. The opportunity was that he now had leverage over the one person who had always held moral authority over him. Phone records show that Jerome called his father's cell phone 17 times on the day he discovered the embezzlement files. When Isaiah finally answered, the conversation lasted 43 minutes, far longer than their usual brief exchanges. Jerome was trying to blackmail his father, Detective Williams explained during his testimony. He wanted Isaiah to use his influence in the community to help him deal with his gambling debts and criminal charges that were likely coming. He figured that between his father's connections and the threat to expose the embezzlement, he could get out of the hole he had dug for himself. But Reverend Isaiah Johnson surprised his son by refusing to be blackmailed. According to a voice message Jerome left on his friend's phone the night before the murders, his father had instead decided to come clean about everything. "The old man grew a conscience," Jerome said in the message, his voice slurred with alcohol. "Says he's going to confess to the church board, return the money somehow, accept whatever punishment comes. Says our family's reputation isn't worth living a lie for. He doesn't understand that our family's reputation is all I have left." The message continued with Jerome's increasingly erratic thoughts. He wants to take Mama and Zara down with him, doesn't care that this will destroy everything we've worked for. I won't let him do it. I can't let him do it. Isaiah's decision to confess wasn't just about his own crimes. According to notes found in his personal journal, he had recently become aware of Jerome's criminal activities. A private investigator hired by one of the identity theft victims had traced the scheme back to Jerome and had contacted Isaiah directly with evidence of his son's involvement. The Reverend was facing an impossible choice, said church elder Samuel Washington. He could protect his son and continue living a lie, or he could do what he knew was right even though it would destroy his family. In the end, his conscience won out, but it cost him his life. The final entry in Isaiah's journal, written the day before the murders, revealed a man wrestling with the weight of his decisions. I have failed as a father and as a man of God. My sins have created a monster in my own son, and now I must face the consequences of my choices. Tomorrow I will call the church board and confess everything. I pray that God will forgive me and that somehow my family can find redemption in the truth. But Jerome Johnson had no intention of allowing his father to confess. By the time Isaiah had made his decision to come clean, Jerome's criminal associates were closing in, his gambling debts were mounting, and law enforcement agencies were building cases against him on multiple fronts. He saw only one way out of the maze of destruction he had created. The murder weapon, a .38 caliber revolver, had been purchased by Jerome 3 weeks earlier from a private dealer in Charleston. He had told the seller he needed protection because of threats from criminals he had encountered during his legal aid work. A story that was technically true, even if he omitted his own role in creating those threats. Security footage from the Johnson family home, obtained from a neighbor's camera system, showed Jerome returning to the house on the afternoon of March 15th, carrying a gym bag. Analysis of his movements suggested he had hidden the gun somewhere in the house, likely in his childhood bedroom, before joining his family for their final Sunday dinner. The Last Supper. The events of March 15th, 2024, began like any other Sunday in the Johnson household. Reverend Isaiah delivered his morning sermon to a packed sanctuary. Deborah taught her adult Sunday school class. Reverend Johnson preached about forgiveness and redemption, about how it's never too late to make things right with God. After the evening service, the family returned home for their traditional Sunday dinner, a ritual that had been sacred in the Johnson household for as long as anyone could remember. According to Jerome's later confession, the dinner began normally, with Isaiah leading the family in prayer and everyone sharing highlights from their week. "We were just a normal family having dinner," Jerome told investigators during his interrogation. "For a few minutes, I almost forgot why I was there." But as the meal progressed, Isaiah brought up the subject that Jerome had been dreading. According to Jerome's account, his father cleared his throat in the way he always did when he had something serious to discuss. "Son, we need to talk about some things that have come to light," Isaiah said, his voice carrying the same authority it held in the pulpit. "There are people asking questions about financial irregularities, both in the church and in your personal life. Tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with the church board to discuss some issues that have been brought to my attention." Jerome's response was to excuse himself from the table, claiming he needed to use the bathroom. Instead, he went to his bedroom and retrieved the .38 caliber revolver from where he had hidden it in his closet. When he returned to the dining room, his family was still eating, still talking about their plans for the week ahead. "I stood in the doorway for a few minutes, just watching them," Jerome confessed. "They looked so peaceful, so innocent. For a second, I thought about putting the gun away, running away, just disappearing and letting them deal with the consequences. But then I thought about what would happen to them when the truth came out. The shame, the humiliation, the way people would look at them. I told myself I was protecting them." The first shot struck Isaiah in the chest as he was reaching for his water glass. According to the forensic evidence, he died almost instantly, slumping forward in his chair without making a sound. Deborah's scream was cut short by the second gunshot, which struck her in the heart as she tried to stand from her chair. Zara had time to say one word, "Jerome?" before the third bullet ended her life. According to the ballistics report, she had raised her hands in a defensive gesture, but the shot passed through her palms and into her chest. "The whole thing took less than 30 seconds, Jerome told investigators. "One moment we were a family having dinner, the next moment they were gone. I just stood there for a while, listening to the silence. It was the first time our house had been quiet during Sunday dinner in my entire life." After the shooting, Jerome calmly placed the gun on the kitchen counter and began washing dishes, as if completing a normal evening routine. When police arrived, they found him methodically cleaning the same plate over and over, his clothes and hands stained with his family's blood. "He was in complete shock," said Officer Patricia Johnson, no relation, who was among the first responders. "He wasn't trying to flee or destroy evidence. He was just standing there washing dishes like nothing had happened. When we told him to put his hands up, he asked if he could finish drying the plate first. The investigation into the Johnson family murders became one of the most complex cases in Savannah's history, involving multiple law enforcement agencies and revealing a criminal network that stretched across several states. As detectives began to unravel Jerome's secret life, they discovered that the Sunday dinner shootings were just the final act in a tragedy that had been building for years. The first breakthrough came when investigators found Jerome's laptop hidden in a storage unit he had rented under a false name. The computer contained detailed records of his identity theft operations, including spreadsheets with victims' personal information, photographs of stolen documents, and correspondence with other members of the criminal network. It was like finding a roadmap to everything Jerome had been doing, explained Detective Williams. He had kept meticulous records of every crime he committed, every person he had victimized, every dollar he had stolen. It was as if he wanted to be caught. In Jerome's twisted logic, staying alive to face the consequences was actually the more noble choice, Dr. Thompson explained. He convinced himself that by surviving, he was taking responsibility for his actions. Of course, this ignores the fact that he had just murdered 3 innocent people to avoid taking responsibility in the first place. As the investigation expanded, authorities discovered that Jerome's crimes had affected far more people than initially realized. The identity theft ring he had helped operate had victimized elderly people across the Southeast, many of whom had lost their life savings. The young women he had exploited suffered lasting psychological trauma. The church members who had trusted him with their personal information faced years of financial recovery. Jerome didn't just kill 3 people that night, said victim advocate Sarah Mitchell, who worked with many of the people Jerome had victimized. He destroyed the lives of hundreds of others. Elderly people who had worked their whole lives lost everything because they trusted a young man whose father they had known for decades. Young women who thought they were getting help with their careers instead became victims of exploitation. The ripple effects of his crimes will be felt for generations. The church community struggled to process not only the murders, but also the revelation of Reverend Isaiah's embezzlement. Mount Olive Baptist Church faced potential bankruptcy as members demanded answers about the missing building fund money. Many longtime congregants left the church entirely, unable to reconcile their faith with the betrayal they felt from their spiritual leader. How do you move forward when everything you believed was built on lies? Asked former church member Gloria Thompson. We trusted these people with our souls, our children, our money. Finding out that they were just as corrupt as anyone else, it shook us to our core. The investigation also revealed the full extent of Isaiah's financial crimes. Over 12 years, he had stolen nearly $800,000 from various church funds, using sophisticated accounting tricks to hide the theft. The money had paid for his children's education, his wife's medical treatments, and a lifestyle that appeared successful, but was actually sustained by theft from his own congregation. Isaiah Johnson was a complex figure, said Detective Williams. On one hand, he genuinely cared about his community and did tremendous good through his ministry. On the other hand, he was stealing from the very people he was supposed to protect. His decision to finally confess suggests he had developed a conscience about his crimes, but by then it was too late. Jerome Johnson's trial began 8 months after the murders in a Savannah courthouse packed with victims, family members, church congregants, and curious onlookers. The case had attracted national media attention due to the shocking nature of the crimes and the betrayal of trust involved in a minister's family. Prosecutor Rebecca Martinez faced the challenge of convincing a jury that Jerome deserved the death penalty, while also explaining the complex web of circumstances that had led to the murders. This wasn't a crime of passion, she told the jury during opening statements. This was a calculated execution carried out by a man who chose murder over accountability. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Over the course of 3 weeks, Martinez presented evidence of Jerome's crimes, his mounting debts, and his increasingly desperate attempts to avoid consequences. She called dozens of witnesses, including identity theft victims, exploited young women, and church members who had trusted Jerome with their personal information. Jerome Johnson lived a double life for years, Martinez told the jury. By day, he was the perfect son, the promising law student, the young man everyone thought would change the world. By night, he was a criminal who preyed on the vulnerable, who stole from the elderly, who exploited young women. When his crimes finally caught up with him, he chose to murder his family rather than face the consequences of his actions. The defense, led by attorney Michael Foster, attempted to portray Jerome as a victim of his father's corrupt influence and the pressure of living up to impossible expectations. Foster argued that Jerome's crimes were a response to learning about his father's embezzlement and that the murders were committed during a psychological break brought on by the stress of his circumstances. Jerome Johnson is not a monster, Foster told the jury. He's a young man who made terrible choices under enormous pressure. Yes, he committed crimes, and yes, he took 3 innocent lives. But the death penalty should be reserved for the worst of the worst, not for someone who was driven to desperation by circumstances beyond his control. The defense called several expert witnesses, including psychologists, who testified about the effects of discovering a parent's criminal behavior and the psychological impact of crushing debt. They also presented character witnesses who spoke about Jerome's positive qualities and his potential for rehabilitation. But the prosecution's case was overwhelming. The evidence of premeditation was clear, the scope of Jerome's crimes was staggering, and the cold-blooded nature of the murders shocked even experienced court observers. When Jerome took the stand in his own defense, his testimony only reinforced the prosecution's argument that he was a master manipulator who felt no genuine remorse. "I love my family," Jerome testified, speaking in the same measured tones he had once used to deliver guest sermons. "Everything I did was to protect them from the shame and humiliation that would have destroyed their lives. I made the ultimate sacrifice to preserve their dignity." Under cross-examination, Martinez systematically dismantled Jerome's claims of noble motivation. She presented evidence showing that Jerome had continued his criminal activities even after discovering his father's embezzlement, that he had made no attempt to warn his victims or make restitution, and that his primary concern had been avoiding prison rather than protecting his family. "You didn't kill your family to protect them," Martinez said during a particularly intense exchange. "You killed them to protect yourself. You couldn't stand the thought of facing the consequences of your actions, so you eliminated the people who would be most hurt by your crimes." Jerome's response was chilling in its detachment. "I understand that you have to say that, counselor, but you didn't know my family like I did. You don't understand what the truth would have done to them." The jury deliberated for just over 6 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts of murder in the first degree. The same jury then spent 3 additional days deliberating on the sentence before recommending death. Judge Patricia Davis, who had presided over the trial with firm control and evident emotion, sentenced Jerome to death by lethal injection. "In my 30 years on the bench," she said during sentencing, "I have never encountered a case that more clearly calls for the ultimate penalty. The defendant showed a callous disregard for human life that is truly shocking. He betrayed the trust of hundreds of people, exploited the vulnerable, and ultimately murdered 3 innocent people to avoid facing the consequences of his actions." In the months following Jerome Johnson's conviction, the communities he had devastated struggled to rebuild and heal. Mount Olive Baptist Church was forced to close its doors permanently, unable to overcome the financial losses from Isaiah's embezzlement and the exodus of members who could no longer separate the institution from the crimes committed by its former pastor and his son. The church building was eventually sold to pay restitution to identity theft victims, though the amount recovered was a fraction of what had been stolen. Many of the elderly victims never fully recovered financially, and several required assistance from social services to meet their basic needs. "The Johnson case changed how we look at financial crimes," said Detective Williams, who left the police force after the trial to work as a victim advocate. "People think of embezzlement and identity theft as white-collar crimes that don't really hurt anyone. But the reality is these crimes destroy lives. Jerome's victims weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were real people with real families who suffered real consequences." The young women Jerome had exploited formed a support group that continues to meet monthly, helping each other process the trauma of their experiences and rebuild their trust in others. Several of them have become advocates for victims of sexual exploitation, using their experiences to help other survivors. "Jerome taught us that predators don't always look like monsters," said one survivor, who requested anonymity. Sometimes they look like the promising young man your parents would love for you to marry. Sometimes they use their family's reputation and their own achievements to gain your trust. We want other young women to know that if something feels wrong, it probably is, no matter how respectable the person seems. As of 2024, Jerome Johnson remains on death row at Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison, where he has shown no interest in appeals or in working with mental health professionals. Prison officials report that he spends most of his time reading legal texts and writing what appear to be memoirs, though he has refused to share them with anyone. Jerome still believes he's the smartest person in the room, said a corrections officer who requested anonymity. He acts like he's studying the law to find some technicality that will get him out of here. But I think he just can't accept that his story is over. The Johnson family murders stand as a stark reminder that evil can hide behind the most respectable facades, that trust must be carefully given and continuously verified, and that the consequences of unchecked corruption and criminality can destroy entire communities. But they also demonstrate the power of survivors to find strength in each other, the importance of holding everyone accountable regardless of their status, and the possibility of rebuilding even after the most devastating betrayals. The case changed how law enforcement agencies investigate financial crimes and exploitation cases, leading to better coordination between local, state, and federal authorities. New protocols were established for protecting vulnerable victims and witnesses, and additional resources were allocated to victim advocacy programs. Perhaps most importantly, the Jerome Johnson case sparked conversations in communities across the country about the importance of transparency, accountability, and the dangers of placing blind trust in people simply because of their family name, education, or position in the community. Today, the former site of the Johnson family home in Peachtree Gardens has been converted into a memorial garden with plaques honoring all 6 of Jerome's victims. The garden serves as a place for reflection and remembrance, but also as a reminder that justice, while sometimes delayed, will ultimately prevail. The Jerome Johnson case proves that no matter how intelligent a criminal may be, no matter how carefully they plan their crimes, and no matter what advantages they may have in terms of family reputation or social status, the truth will eventually come to light. Justice may be slow, but it is inevitable for those who choose to prey on the innocent. If this story has affected you, or if you know someone who might be a victim of financial fraud or exploitation, remember that help is available through local law enforcement agencies, victim advocacy organizations, and federal authorities. The courage of Jerome's victims in coming forward helped ensure that justice was served, and their example continues to inspire other survivors to seek help and hold their abusers accountable. Don't forget to like this video if you found this deep dive into the Jerome Johnson case informative, and subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories that examine the psychology behind the headlines in the pursuit of justice for victims and their families.